Welcome back to Trending in Education. Brandon Jones, Michael Palmer, and myself, Dan Strafford, here with you to put a bow on our March Madness competition. We have a winner. We'll bring that to you momentarily. We'll talk about the brackets, the matchups, and the topics that were part of our March Madness and how we'll track them into the future here on the podcast. But first and foremost, I always like to check in. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm amped. I'm hype, yo. Like I've been making that noise more now. I am I'm going to make new noises. I don't even know what they are yet. I'm so excited. But March Madness was fun this year. This might be our most exciting March Madness ever. And I'm happy to share the story. We talk about storytelling. There's some fantastic stories to be told about our March Madness.
Absolutely agree. Brandon, how about yourself? I know you're battling through an illness to be with us today. We appreciate that, of course. How are you otherwise?
There is no otherwise for me, Dan. This is just how I am. So imagine me feeling the way that I sound. That's about right. So apologies to listeners. My instrument is not at full form today, but I am powering through it. I like you guys so much, and I'm so mad about March that I had to be here for the bow tying show.
This is your hashtag flu game, right? I mean, clearly.
That's right.
This will be legendary. March Madness is in the future, 10, 15 years from now, people will be like, do you remember when Brandon showed up with a sore throat? He popped a lozenge right before the show started. They'll be telling tales of
it's like me and MJ basically have everything in common. So this was the one thing that was missing from my game was the flu game. So now I brung it.
Rounding out the repertoire, if you will. Dan, I'm sorry, please.
No, Michael Jordan, Willis Reed, these stories of athletes coming back, and here's Brandon Jones doing it for the podcast and for all you listeners. And we appreciate everybody tuning in to today's podcast. We're going to talk about the winner momentarily. Wanted to quickly take a look at the bracket as it was, how it broke down, Mike. I think one of the takeaways we see is maybe future-proofing some of the seeding and figuring out exactly which matchups are going to be the best as we roll forward. But in that first round, off the top here, some blowouts, some close matchups. Any topic that you see that you thought would make it through? Any topic that you thought was going to make it out of at least that first round of games that did not and lost in the first round?
Dan, were you just throwing shade at the seeding process to our March Madness? Because I thought it was fantastic. The way the level of forethought that went into the seating and the design, it was really well designed.
+1
bracket is really what I would have to say. I don't know. JOMO really was the Cinderella story. So I got to say something about that JOMO. It wasn't quite a 16 seed. So that was certainly exciting. So we had brain science and learning, which is a great topic. Neuroscience, we love neuroscience, and matched up against JOMO, or the joy of missing out. And that just turned into a really surprising matchup. And I guess JOMO kind of caught fire as a concept, and people liked it. Also, I think the people who vote in Twitter like JOMO.
Sure.
So who knows if JOMO's actually going to be as big as it at least was in the early rounds. But yeah, I think there's some really exciting matchups really throughout. But I'd say aside from that, most of the top seeds performed okay. Just kind of looking at it, right?
We lost the whole teacher movement to screenlessness in round one.
Right.
A little bit of an upset there, though. Again, can see people, and interesting that is a Twitter vote and people voting for screenlessness and
Yes.
how that interacts with one another. And we also lost learning pods in the first round to edifying edutainment. That was probably more of a 8-9 than a 7-10, but a close matchup between those two that they rolled forward. I know we talked many times over about learning pods and the power of audio, so I'm sure that's something we'll come back to again in the future. But it does feel like the whole teacher movement was one to me, Mike, that in that first round, I expected to move on to the second round, and it did not, falling there in that matchup with screenlessness.
I also think a lot of it is people are voting for what sounds good because we didn't really give much more than the words, right? So, I do think in previous years, we've done Eminem 8 Mile style showdown debates, which right now, by the way, especially with Brandon's pipes slightly damaged.
It's like a DMX version of Brendan.
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, so I think maybe we learned a little more about our audience and how they feel about these turns of phrase.
Sure.
I actually thought whole teacher movement was a nice turn of phrase, but I think there's something elegant about screenlessness that just surprised here. So I don't know, Brandon. We're trying not to make you take too many shots because I know you're a little raspy here. But,
no, it's fine. I'm gonna keep shooting. It's
any
okay.
thoughts? Any thoughts around the first round here?
I was gonna say the same thing that you did, Mike. So I will say the same thing, which I think it's hard to discern exactly what the voters intended with their votes. And I would be inclined to think that they were reacting to the catchiness of the sort of how we branded each of these contestants, as much as to the content of them as instead. Mm-hmm. So JOMO, I will. We can talk about JOMO because JOMO keeps going, keeps riding.
Yeah,
did not end up winning, but everybody loves the Cinderella.
Except for you.
I think JOMO, my favorite part about JOMO is that, Mike, you may have coined it. It could be apocryphal, but there's been at least said on this podcast that you were the auteur, the person who came up with it. But JOMO is great. It's great. It sounds great. People like FOMO, but it's not FOMO. It surprises you because it puts the J in the FOMO. It's the JOMO.
Right. And why fear when you can joy?
For sure. Versus brain science and learning. Like brain science and learning, which I think was hashtag Team Brandon. Folks can't see, but Mike is doing the Pulp Fiction square with his fingers there. It's real square.
Yeah.
It's
but science is in, I mean.
Yeah, I think that if with a better hype man, hype person,
sure,
brain science and learning,
hire a PR firm or something,
could have done better. Yeah. But this is actually not to go too sort of insider on this, but we actually experience this in our own as we're talking about our own products here at Kaplan, like things that we know that actually improve retention, improve outcomes, learning science. Space learning, interleaving, all of this, you start saying those words and people are like, wah, 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 wah. It's the Charlie Brown teacher. It doesn't, for whatever reason, it doesn't resonate with the audience. Like when we do testing to see how that how an audience responds versus something else, those are always losers, even though we actually know that they are the winners. Like they are what brain science and learning is part of what makes learning happen.
Yeah.
So, we saw this play out in our bracket, but we've seen this play out in the market as well.
And we just got to workshop the name a little more. I think. I feel like
send it to the guy who brought you JOMO. I think Mike, if you can do a little work on brain science and learning.
Yeah.
Next time out, maybe weave in Neuralink a little bit more into the brain science, then we might have a winner. Round two, Brandon, Kidsolving went up against JOMO. We're seeing some more Kidsolving happening. An article out Wednesday of April 3rd was about protests by students in New York and I believe it was Virginia, but I might be misquoting there, against policies and racial tensions and kids solving the problems on campus, and how there's a long history of student protests and walkouts in our society that have helped push culture forward, push policy forward. And it's happening. It's not just Parkland last year. We're seeing more and more of it this year. Fell here to JOMO, but does feel like Kidsolving is one of those topics that will be ever present probably from here on out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like when we've had teachers, this time we had the whole teacher movement, as Mike was saying. We've had the importance of teachers was one of our co-winners in year one of March Madness. I think the fact that it didn't win in subsequent years doesn't mean it's unimportant. And I would say the same thing about Kidsolving. Kidsolving was the winner from last year. And I think you see more and more of that, and we'll continue to see that. Obviously, I'm a big believer in that personally. I think it's the battlefield is littered with things that JOMO just beat on the strength. I think it's not that the content of JOMO isn't appealing too. I think it is also, but there is, I think, nothing that's better branded in this list than JOMO.
Well, especially when you go up against that JOMO mojo.
Oh man!
I mean, what are you gonna do? Right?
It just keeps coming. I like that.
We had a human-centered STEM go up against robots and move on. Interactive everything beat edifying edutainment, and mindful learning beat out screenlessness. Two similar topics there, at least probably from a conceptual standpoint. Mike, anything stand out in those matchups of topics or matchups that you thought were interesting?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think knocking out robots, I got to say I was a little surprised because I thought robots, so aptly coined or named by Brandon as a thing, because it's like, why overthink it? Just call it robots. And like, I thought there was an elegant simplicity to that. And then also you can't throw a rock in this town, whichever town you're in, without hitting a robot. You know, it might be like a Roomba, but like it's at least robot-like. It's like a smart appliance, if not a robot, right? So like, you know, why quibble? And you know, I thought robots had more in it, but then human-centered STEM, you know, it was one of those, you know, are you on the side of the Rebel Alliance? Are you on the side of the Empire here? And you know, thankfully our audience, I think, voted for the Rebel Alliance. So the force was strong in them, and they would not allow the robots to win just yet. So I was pretty happy to see human-centered STEM, which we were talking about during the open. I think originally was STHEM, so like the H in the middle of STEM, which sounds like STEM, which is just so terrible to say to yourself that no one would vote for it. So I was glad that we renamed it human-centered STEM, because who knows what might have knocked out robots otherwise. I mean, like sometimes it's matchups. I think robots had some matchup problems with human-centered STEM, and I was happy to see that advance. And honestly, I was a little disappointed just because I thought screenlessness was a nice idea, but I think it's, again, tough matchup because like mindfulness is just so prevalent these days, and mindfulness, interactivity, like those themes I think are really interesting, where like as we get to the later rounds, it is interesting to start thinking about how we're kind of gleaning the collective consciousness by virtue of this little March Madness exercise we do each year. And you know, that's why I think screenlessness, it was like mindful screenlessness, maybe it would have had a shot.
Yeah, I thought that about both of those two matchups. So, you know, human-centered STEM, like you get the robots out of the STEM, right? You got the science, technology, engineering, and math, and like that brings you your robots. It's like robots brought to you by STEM. So like I wonder if it were like human amplifying robots. You know, if there was something that brought the word human, this is again just from like a PR perspective, brought the word human into the robots contestant here, like if that would have done better, right? Because essentially you could argue human-centered STEM is robots plus humans, and the humans Rebel Alliance. I'm assuming the humans are the Rebel Alliance here and the robots are the Empire.
Robots by themselves are the Empire.
Right, yeah. So that human, like the human-centered STEM, like the humans who were voted, and I think something like at least 45% of our votes were by humans in this in this March Madness bracket, winner determining bracket. So, you know, I think this is like a little bit of repping your people, you know, like humans voting for humans, not surprising, but robots, like when I drafted robots onto #Team Brandon, it was and thanks for the nod on the simplicity, Mike. It's a front-handed dig. I was thinking about how robots are actually amplifying human lives, right? So that whether it's in all of the the measurements of humanity, whether it's things that are making things more accessible for humans with disabilities.
Keeping the dust off the floor.
We're talking Roombas again. Yeah, like basically the only robot that most people know is a Roomba. You couldn't throw a rock without hitting a Roomba. But yeah, like whatever it is, it's really robots. I think will go farthest until they start, being AI driven, till the factory lines start rolling off robots without our control to amplify and make better human lives.
I know I shared with you both the video of my local Stop and Shop, the cleanup robot that was going around the Stop and Shop and had googly eyes on it, but also had a giant camera that was watching everyone as it went by up and down the aisles, beeping, saying that it was there for everyone's safety. I question that ever so slightly, but nonetheless, Robots Falls here. We continue on in the bracket matchups, and we turn our attention to the semifinals. JOMO versus human-centered STEM, interactive everything versus mindful learning. The second matchup there, Brandon, interactive everything versus mindful learning, seems like almost a yin and yang sort of matchup where you have maybe two different thoughts. Interaction typically thinks of digital, thinks of chat and video and polling, whereas the obvious mindful learning has been very much human-centered, getting some time potentially away from technology. And it was a good vote, a close vote. But these are two topics I think are going to be somewhat connected more and more as we move forward as well. Do you agree? And did you see it as a matchup you think we'll talk about again in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is like a little grapes and raisins here, like all, raisins are grapes, not all grapes are raisins. Like you can have mindful learning by turning off your interactive everything. You can't necessarily have interactive everything just by plugging in your mindful learning, right? So like I think interactive everything doesn't necessarily mean that you must have everything always be interactive. Like right. You can actually exercise that choice to unplug, to make sure that you're doing some introspection, that you're being mindful. So to me, I think that's a little bit, you got both in the interactive everything. I do think that, it was present in a lot of the screenlessness we talked about. I think even some of the human-centered STEM, I think some of the whole teacher movement, some of these things about what's our digital presence and what's our analog presence, and how are those two things complementary? How are those two things in some tension? I think that's actually going to be a thing we talk about for like the rest of our lives. That there's going to be ever more efficient and effective ways to plug in, and ways that are built so that when you plug in, you're getting like that chemical release in your brain that makes like closely connected to addiction, where like you are getting drawn in and it's harder to unplug. That versus what is really the human experience, and how much does unplugging allow you to be more mindful as you construct a life? Like it's not like this is brand new, but it's becoming increasingly important for us to have that dialogue, and I think we'll be so for the foreseeable future.
Mike, on the other half of the bracket, JOMO Falls. It was a great run. It was Loyola of Chicago. It was any of the great Cinderella runs in the NCAA tournament over the course of the past many years. JOMO Falls 2, human-centered STEM. We've talked about that in depth a bit. JOMO has been something we've talked about here as well. Did you like the matchup as it came to be, or would you have preferred JOMO to have a softer target there in the semifinals to make the leap to the finals as a 16 seed?
Well, like for me, JOMO was Bill Murray's character, Carl from Caddyshack. So like Cinderella story, winning the Masters out of nowhere. It's very timely. The Masters are about to heat up in the next week or so, but easy to root for. Interactive everything, I think, is wound up knocking out a bunch of the ideas that I really was drawn to. So like interactive everything beat edifying edutainment, which is interesting because in some ways interactive edutainment is probably going to beat regular edutainment. So like that's sort of the idea. That's why interactive everything is kind of like a juggernaut idea, where it's like whatever you give it, it takes it, like yes ends it. It's like, that's great, but what if it's also interactive? And I think that's why, again, the savvy audience of voters that we had out there, I think made some clever choices. But interestingly, you can't really have interactive JOMO, you know? So like JOMO coming up against interactivity, you kind of need to make a choice. And that's where I think there might be a little sampling bias. People who are on Twitter are looking for, they're not JOMOing. They're actually in the moment, you know, like they're doing stuff. So I think they're more likely to vote for interactive everything. But don't snooze on that JOMO, because there's JOMO in screenlessness. There's JOMO in mindful learning.
Sure.
You know, we talked a little bit, Dan, during the prep for this show. You know, there's the what wins the tournament, and then there's which ideas really win the year, is something that I think is different, that we're going to need to continue to monitor. And then that said, I just saw there was another article about Echo, the company who does interactive video on Netflix, now releasing recipes, interactive recipes through Netflix. So like, I do think that concept might actually be kind of the big game changer in the next year or so. So we'll see how it goes.
I hope interactive recipes means I can just skip to the recipe rather than having to read 5 paragraphs about where the recipe came from before actually getting it on the screen. Little complaint when I'm trying to cook. Just give me the ingredients, give me how to do it, and then you give me the story behind it. I'll read it later. The finals came around, and we got a good matchup here. It was a bit of a blowout. Human-centered STEM beating interactive everything 14-3. So your winner for the 2019 March Madness in learning and education is human-centered STEM. Now, this was a matchup that pitted.
No, it's the other way around, Dan. What are you talking about? What are you talking? That was your moonlight moment, right?
Are you yeah, you just gave us.
You were Warren Beatty.
La La Land.
Did I really just?
I think so. This is amazing.
I like that. I mean, if we wanna thumb on the scale a little bit here, Dan, you know, like
that's terrible.
But
did you go out into the woods and interview all those reluctant JOMO non-voters?
Interactive everything beats human-centered STEM.
I love it. This is my favorite part of the year.
That's poor. That's poor on my part. But nonetheless, I guess we can have everybody interact with this and yell at me on Twitter at Trending and Ed. So feel free to do that for the misspeak there. But interactive everything, as has been set up by Brendan and Mike's entire show here, takes home the 2019 March Madness of Learning and Education. There it is. Pop the champagne. But nonetheless, the interaction point you've talked about many times over, Mike and Brandon, it's just about basically bringing it all in, right, Mike? You can sort of attach almost anything. You've made the joke of, wouldn't it be much better with interaction? Where does it go next? Like, what do you think 2019 sees for interactive everything? Is it more in the line of the Netflix Bandersnatch and what they have going, or from an education point of view, what do you see is next for interactive everything?
Well, I mean, I think it's easy to focus just on the winner as opposed to like the oeuvre that is our March Madness. By the way, oeuvre is in the running with Zeitgeist for words we say a lot. So I just wanted to put that out there. But as a body of work, I think there's some interesting tensions, just to kind of pick up on what Brandon was talking about earlier, where like interactive everything in a world where there's a movement towards getting away from screens, and you know, even our unlearning show was getting some pickup recently about, you know, letting go of things, you know, so. You know, sometimes there's what's popular, and then there's what's actually insightful and predictive. And I think there's going to be some interesting tensions here, where people are going to still seek out interactive content because the lean back isn't always a win. But I still remember when we did our interactive video show about Bandersnatch, I thought Brandon shared some interesting perspective there too, where like sometimes when I'm seeking out entertainment, I don't always want it to be a lean in. Like, why?
Yeah, the passive. Yep.
Why do you need me to interact? You know, like part of why I love podcasts, or why I like, you know, I just watched Russian Doll on Netflix, which was great. And like, it's just really easy to binge, you know, and don't make me choose, you know, don't make me think. There was a great usability book years back. Don't make me think. So even as Interactive Everything wins our brackets, I think it'll be a big part of what's happening, but I think we're starting to see forces and counter forces kind of in some ways winning the day. So I think it'll be fun to track this, maybe figure out some scoring rubric, if you will, so that we could figure out whether trends are continuing. How do we score whether a trend is scoring? I think last year Kidsolving was so clearly a winner. Aside from just winning the March Madness, it was such a prevalent theme for 2018. For 2019, I don't know how we're going to score it. I mean, Interactive Everything's a winner, but I imagine many of the themes that we've discussed in the March Madness and we're talking about on the show are going to continue to score. So maybe that's some weak tea in terms of my take, but sometimes weak tea is good. A little Darjeeling once in a while never hurt nobody, right?
Brandon, how about yourself as we round out the show? The March Madness coming to a close, and the correct winner, to reiterate, is Interactive Everything. Not my mistake there. But do you see it as a clear-cut winner, or to Mike's point, do you feel as though this is a little bit more of a closer field and one that has more maybe connective tissue than we saw last year, with Kidsolving be so far and away the clear winner of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to year one where we had a literal tie between AI and the importance of teachers, right? So, and those two things you could argue are pretty sort of point counterpoint. I think that the counterpoint is more some of the things we were just talking around about, sort of mindfulness and screenlessness and JOMO versus interactive everything. I think that it's probably you probably know you're on to a trend when the counter trend to that is also evident, because if there isn't one, there's probably not that much pull in the other direction, right? So I think that's going to not be. I think that's a feature here of our March Madness entries, and ultimately the winner is you can actually point to the places in which interactive everything is not what's trending, but I think that only goes to underscore how it is. So, yeah, I think the Bandersnatch, like I'd rather have a leaned out experience. I think that choice is just really important. Humans want to exercise that agency, even if that agency means don't make me think. Don't make me have to continue to make choices. Like I was talking about in that episode. Like I would rather see them cordon off things like Bandersnatch into a separate place. I'm thinking about the Netflix UX UI, have just a different row for things that are interactive, because I sometimes I feel like, and not sometimes I don't. I want to know what I'm getting into before I get into it. So I think that the idea of having interactive everything that doesn't always need to be on, to the point of that versus mindfulness, or that doesn't always need a leaned in posture from the participants, that to me is probably the winning play here. But I'm interested in both sides of this. I think we'll see where this develops over not just 2019 as we think about how we score it, Mike, but I think really the next, as I was saying, for forever. Got to figure out how we measure and manage these trends.
I will say that first year I couldn't have screwed up the results. There was a tie. No matter what I said, it would have been just fine. AI or teachers.
I long for that first year.
Oh, there it is. That's going to do it for this episode. Find us every Tuesday here, Trending in Education, trendingineducation.com. New episodes every Tuesday. Also adding extras along the way. You heard from Rohit Bhargava again. You heard voting with the Porpoise, which is a great, fun episode Mike and I got to record with their author. And then more coming your way. Don't forget the Citadel will be back. We'll release information about how that will come your way. And you can find that information over on Twitter at Trending in Ed, Trending in Ed on Facebook, trendingineducation.com. Thanks so much for listening as always, and we'll be back with a new episode of Trending in Education.